Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. In our series on controversial issues related to women, let's turn our attention to the role of women as witnesses in the Islamic context. I've often heard that when it comes to women serving as witnesses, 2 women are required in the place of 1 man. Is this true? Let's sit down with Dr. Shabir Ally and learn more. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So we're talking about controversial issues related to women. We're talking about the issue of witnesses. So I'm going to ask you straight up front. So in the Quran, does it say somewhere specifically that if you have a woman as a witness, she can't be the sole witness? And if it's a man, 1 man is good enough?
The closest the Quran comes to saying anything like this is in the 2nd chapter of the Quran, the 282nd verse. So we need to be very specific about what the verse says and to look at how people have interpreted and misinterpreted the verse or misapplied it and generalized from it. So the verse basically says that if you're writing a loan contract, then you should call together 2 witnesses. And the terminology there are 2 male witnesses. But it further specifies that if not 2 men, then 1 man and 2 women. So that if one of the women should slip or deviate from the point, then the other one will remind her. And then it goes on to other issues. So some have generalized from this to think that, well, normally you would need 2 women in the place of 1 man, regardless of what the case is.
So I guess that's where the question comes. Why is it, or what's the wisdom behind just having 1 man as a witness and his testimony is good enough, but for women, why is there that, not discrepancy, but question that one may slip up? That same question can be put forth to a guy.
To a man as well, yes. So naturally, this is a question that arises in the modern mind because we are familiar with the fact that men and women are equal players in the modern world, in business, in politics, in legal spheres, regardless. So it seems strange to require 2 women in the place of 1 man. So we have to understand how this played out historically. What were the circumstances that gave rise to a ruling like this? And why we should better limit it to this specific case rather than to think of it more generally, and why we should relegate this to a historical circumstance rather than think of applying it in this way in our modern times. When we read the Quran, naturally the Quran is for all times and all places. This is a common Muslim belief. But what scholars recognize is that while it is for all times and all places, there are some passages in the Quran which are very time specific, which are conditional upon the circumstances of the revelation at the time when the Quran was revealed some 1400 years ago. So I see this as one of those passages. So let's get down to it then to answer your question more directly. So in the time of the Quranic revelation, women did not generally participate in business transactions. We hear of the fact that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, worked for a businesswoman prior to his revelation. That was Khadija, whom he eventually married. But notice that he was conducting the business on her behalf. So she was wealthy, but he was the trader for her.
And she was in charge, I guess.
She was in charge, but she wouldn't undertake the journeys. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, undertook the journeys to travel and to conduct the transactions on her behalf. So this may have been more generally the case in that business was a man's world and women had more domestic sort of responsibilities. So in that situation, even to call a woman forward as a witness would have been unusual. The natural thing was that men would participate together in the business transactions, witnessing, writing, and supervising a contract. In the Bible, we get an idea of how women fared in the ancient world when it came to business transactions. A woman's vow could be nullified by her father or her brother. So far from witnessing a transaction, even like giving a vow, making a solemn statement about what one will do, could be negated by the males in one's family. So coming to the Quran then, in that situation, for a woman to be called to be a witness, this would have been unusual. And if a woman were to be called in a situation that is dominated by men, and she were to be cross-questioned and aggressively interrogated, she might more tend towards amiableness within the situation rather than to hold her position in the face of all of this male aggression. So to give her support, moral support more than anything else, the Quran specified that one woman basically to give the testimony and another one to be in her support. So the phrase says specifically, أَن تَضِلَّ إِحْدَاهُمَا فَتُذَكِّرَ إِحْدَاهُمَا الْأُخْرَى, so that if one of them should deviate, the other one will remind her. It's almost as you don't really need two of them to bear the witness, but one of them to give evidence on
Just in
behalf
case.
of the team, yes.
So are there any, so this is specific to the business transactions, and I think you gave a good example of that. Are there any verses in the Quran that speak to a woman's witness as just being her sole witness and that's good enough?
Yes, there is the specific case of a man accusing his wife of infidelity. Now, again, if you compare this with what was there before, in the book of Numbers, we know that there is a situation where a man complains against his wife. He brings her to the high priest, and the high priest makes her drink a bitter water and invoke a curse upon herself in case the accusation is true. It doesn't seem like the woman has any voice in the whole proceeding here, the way this is described. But in the Quran, it is mentioned that if a man accuses his wife of infidelity, he has to swear 5 times that he's telling the truth. Now, I might ask, why 5 times? It seems one on his own behalf, because he's making a case, and 4 on behalf of the usual 4 witnesses which would be required in a case of infidelity or to prove infidelity. So because he has no 4 witnesses, he has to testify once in each person's stead. And then the Quran says after he has done this, the woman will free herself from any blame if she were then to testify 5 times that what he's saying is untrue. And it's very interesting that the Quran put it this way, because she's not even testifying that she has been faithful. She's just answering the specific charge and saying that those charges are not true.
So she does that 5 times as well?
She does it 5 times as well. And it would seem that, why 5 times? Because each one of the times is negating one of the testimonies.
Oh, interesting.
1 against her husband and 4 against the purported 4 absentee witnesses, symbolically, obviously. But what it does mean is that there is a 1-for-1 equality here. The 1 male witness, 1 female witness. And surprisingly, well, naturally, what the Quran says in the end is that the woman is free from blame once she testifies like this. And that means that her testimony is not only equal to the others, but cancels out the others. That is, the male witnesses.
So as we think about, you gave that one example, that situation was limited to business transactions. This is the situation in a marital situation. So applying it to our context today, how can we use this? When you did specify earlier on that within the business transaction context, it was limited to what the situation was of that time. So
yes.
Where do we stand on
now,
this?
returning to the passage itself and the business transaction, we see that, first of all, the discussion about this verse should have limited that question of witnessing to this specific circumstance. But okay, people have generalized. What do we do now? We go back and we recognize that there were very ancient commentators on the Quran, and this is testified in the classical commentaries of Al-Qurtubi and Ibn Kathir. Very early commentaries on the Quran said that even the writing of the contract is not a necessity, even though it's given in the command form. So people think because the Quran puts something in the command form, it must be done and specifically in that way. So even the manner of witnessing, you don't have to do it in that specific way. So when the Quran says call 2 women, it doesn't have to be 2 women. What is intended is that you should have a contract, and that will be, as the Quran says, ذَلِكَ أَدْنَى أَلَّا تَرْتَابُوا, so that you should not doubt later on. But the next verse in the Quran, following this one, Surah 2, verse 283 now is what we're dealing with, says that if you happen to be on the road and you are entering into such a transaction, then if you trust each other, then you don't need any kind of written contract, or you don't even have to hand over something as a guarantee for the return of the loan. And that means then that the whole thing can hinge on this question of trust. So the commentators say that if the 2 parties trust each other, there is no need for a written contract in the first place. So I would say that since there's no need for a written contract, there is also no need for this specificity about the gender and number of witnesses. So long as if you're going to write a contract, you get witnesses, the number that you will be happy with. And in our modern times, it doesn't matter which gender, because both genders are equally business savvy and reliable in giving witness in such transactions.
A beautiful wrap-up. Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Hey YouTube, we hope you benefited from this video. If you liked it, or if you didn't, let us know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more, check out some of our other videos. And don't forget to subscribe so you can get new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.